Hi, everybody. Welcome and good evening to the broadcast. Tonight's webinar comes because it's probably one of the things that I think wilderness therapy, the kind of therapy that we do, has the biggest and best impact on, and that's in changing the locus of control. So I'm going to talk about what locus of control is, talk about how it changes and how we can contribute to that change, and how it's part of having a healthy outlook on life and being mentally healthy and emotionally healthy in our lives. And I think it applies to us as parents and also applies to us as individuals in our own lives and how we approach our children. And man's search for meaning, I'm going to bring that into this discussion. And it's important to note it's one of the two recommended readings for all of our clients. Now, some clients, therapists will make a decision not to have them read that, but it is the default reading for all of our clients. And it has been since the day we opened our doors back in 1998. So it becomes a very core message in our program. Here's a quote from it. Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud believed, or a quest for power, as Alfred Adler taught, but a quest for meaning. The greatest task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life. Frankel saw three possible sources for meaning: in work, doing something significant; in love, caring for another person; and in courage during difficult times. Suffering in and of itself is meaningless. We give our suffering meaning by the way we respond to it. And I think right out of the gate, I think we can see the power of this message as it relates to the children and those of us who parent them. Because one of our greatest challenges, and perhaps one of our greatest mistakes, is not allowing our children to feel something difficult, not allowing them to struggle, not allowing them to move through pain and healthy suffering in their lives. And our lack of empathic capacity, right, that thing that prevents us from tolerating that empathic misery, oftentimes triggers us to step in where we could just allow it to be. And that's a hard thing for a parent, right? It is our instinct. It's almost an overdeveloped instinct in us to try to come and rescue our children because when they are very young, they need us to survive. And so, in some ways, I like to think of that instinct that we have to step in as an over evolved part of ourselves that really is a healthy part of ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about that this evening and how it relates to all this. So let's talk about what the definition of locus of control is. Internal locus of control is the sense of what I do is the most important thing in determining my happiness and my sense of well-being. So what I do matters. So I can make a difference. External locus of control says that what happens to me determines my happiness and my sense of well-being. So it's what happens to me. And so you can start to see already how important it is that we make this shift. A lot of our clients, students, come into the program with that sense of victimhood, that sense of I'm not responsible for my own happiness. I'm not responsible for my sense of well-being. I want to blame my parents for that. I want to blame my teachers, blame everybody for that. Now, that's different. Understanding where and how you hurt is different than blaming them, and I'll talk about that also this evening. And we've seen, like I said, in our research that we're able to improve dramatically the shift from external locus of control to internal locus of control. And I think parents have a lot to do with that, or at least can contribute to that in a very positive way. In existential therapy and theory, they talk about it in terms of good faith and bad faith. And it's those words are interesting words because they don't mean on the surface what they mean to us. Good faith is taking responsibility for your life. Bad faith is blaming and making other people and things responsible for your life, situations. And I've reversed the examples here to illustrate. Examples of bad faith are saying something like, I'm a social worker helping abused children because my dad abused me. Right? You're not acknowledging the choice, the response that you made to it. Or in a more simple way, it's when we say in our feeling exchanges with each other, you made me feel X. Right? That's bad faith. That's me making you ultimately the cause and the responsibility for how I feel. Good faith, and I'm using a negative example to illustrate the point even more clearly. An example of good faith is to say, I use drugs because I don't want to deal with the pain and the trauma of my childhood. So again, it's not about the quality of living or the decision. It's the very fact of owning it. Like, I'm trying to escape the pain. That's why I'm using. That's why I'm self-medicating. Or, like I said, a more simple way of doing it, instead of saying, you make me feel, we learn to say, I feel this way when this happens, when this event occurs. And I feel this way because I think, right? These are my beliefs. This is my filter. And so you can see even in our communication skills training that we have for our clients and for their parents, we're trying to shift people. It's something we pay a lot of attention to. And it changes. It changes the way that we think when we replace our simple words, our simple communication tools with examples of good faith. I feel this way. I own this. There's a huge relationship to locus of control with a lot of disorders, mental health and addictions. But we see them very clearly in anxiety and depression. Depression is a core feature of it is this learned helplessness that there's no way out. I can't do anything that will make a positive difference in my life. I'm in an absolute lose-lose situation. And so when we think about experiential wilderness therapy, we think about young people starting to make decisions through the primitive living nomadic model that make a difference in their everyday life. We use the metaphor of making fires, of building a shelter, right? All of the chores and day-to-day living become wonderful metaphors for the difference they can make in their life. You don't need a long lecture if somebody doesn't listen to the shelter building instruction they get from their field staff and they end up with a shelter that blows over in the middle of the night or that leaks rainwater on them. There's no lecture needed for that. The lesson is inherent in the activity. And they start to learn, to do difficult things. There's a couple of really strong sources of self-esteem. I've talked a lot, and maybe the most important source is being heard. Right? A powerful connection, a healthy connection to somebody in our lives. That's the biggest, most important contribution that we can make and that others make to our self-esteem. Another really core piece of it is a sense of self-efficacy, that what I do makes a difference. That the choices I have in life, that I can do something powerful, that I matter. And wilderness therapy does a fantastic job at encouraging and fostering that, right? You all know that. I talk to parents all the time who are more impressed at times with their son or daughter who's working, for example, at getting a bow drill fire, and they don't get it, but they don't give up for an hour, right? That's something that parents can be really impressed. It's even more impressive, I think. It's kind of interesting to watch somebody get a fire really quick. If they're really good at it, or they have a really good fire set, or they're really well prepared. That's kind of fun and interesting to see. But I think the most impressed parents, the most impressed family members, loved ones, staff, are those that watch a child, a young person, young adult or adolescent, go through an activity like that, an exercise like that, and try and try and try, even after many failures. So they start to experience this sense that they get a taste of it. You see that change typically, it's not always the same, around week 4 or 5, where they start to feel the difference that decisions that they're making in their life, that they start to feel the difference that it's making in their life. They start to taste it and feel it for themselves. So that's locus of control. And there's one very powerful piece of this, and I'll talk about this. This is a quote I have on the cover of my book, From Man's Search for Meaning. That wilderness therapy in some ways takes away a lot of freedoms. I remember I had a young man named Jimmy years ago. And after he read his impact letters, that we were sitting in session, I was talking about the fact that he wasn't going to be going home after the program, that he was going to be going to a therapeutic boarding school for some time. And he said with tears in his eyes, "You've taken away all of my freedom except for my choices." And I said to him, "Will you say that again?" And he said it again. And I pointed out to him, that's the only place where real freedom exists, is in your choices about how to respond. And so there's something, we don't do it just for this reason, but when a system becomes so immovable, like wilderness therapy can be, like the weather out in the wilderness can be, like the staff, like the therapists are, when it becomes immovable, when the child is not capable of manipulating or changing his or her circumstances, Viktor Frankel says, one is only left then with the alternative, which is to change themselves. And so sometimes the immovable object is the best thing to encourage this kind of shift from external to internal locus of control. I want to talk a little bit about etiology and incure. And I want to be careful with that language because I think it can be too simplistic, and for many people it can be shame and guilt triggering. But I want to talk about systems and contributions. And I think there are a lot of times when we set up in our families, as parents, myself included, scenarios that are lose-lose, right? That if you express yourself, I'm going to get mad at you. I'm going to punish you. And if you don't express yourself, you're going to be miserable. So either way, you lose in the system, especially in strong shame-based systems where children have to take care of the parents. Children have to like the parents, think the parents are good parents, think the parents are doing a good job, think the parents are right. When parents need all of that from the child has no place to put his or her anger, his or her hurt. And it's going to go one of two places. It's going to come outward, which many of them demonstrated outwardly, or it's going to go inward. And that's what's going to look like depression and anxiety. So part of our work as parents becomes giving them the right, the gift that we give them is giving them the right to be mad at us, to not like us. And it takes a groundedness, right? A confidence, a sense of self in the parent, which a lot of us are still struggling to develop. That's why we talk so much about these webinars, why we talk so much about doing your work, why we ask you to go to therapy, why we ask you to go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous meetings, is because those are the places you go to heal and repair that fracture, that partial self. That place that you're operating from where the child has to like or agree or subscribe to your philosophy. Those things, we talk about rescuing a lot in parenting. We talk about helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting. And again, the reason I don't like some of those phrases is because they come from a place of judgment, condescending to parents when this is the most difficult job that we all know in the world. Raising children, being a parent. And those phrases, helicopter parent, snowplow parent, they come from a damaged sense of ourselves, right? Just like all symptoms in mental health, the root of it is often found in our wounds. And so if I was okay, if you can imagine an ideal where I'm okay, then I'm okay with anything virtually you say and do to me. I don't see that as about me. I see that as about you. I hear you in that exchange. So that's why, again, we have to go back to healing. Alice Miller describes this in the book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. If we don't heal the initial wounds, if we ask our children to take care of us, if we ask our children to provide us with that thing that our parents were not able to provide, which is unconditional love and acceptance, if we're asking that of the children, we're getting it all backwards. And the most difficult thing is they are unconsciously, unknowingly, unwittingly going to provide that sense to us at times at the cost of their own selves. Sometimes they'll act it out. Sometimes they've had enough. Sometimes they lash out at us. And in some ways, that's a child who's taking better care of themselves. They're not articulating it. It's not pleasant. It's obnoxious. But it also is a fight for them to defend themselves from feeling consumed and unheard and dismissed. I think as parents, I talk about this a lot of times with parents, overvaluing wins and successes and undervaluing losses, struggles, and mistakes. If there's one thing I would foster in parents is to take a step back and to see the value in the struggle, in the mistakes. And our expectation, our hope, our want, our begging, our waiting on them, getting it, growing up, acting and thinking like an adult, our expectations in that area, that's an us problem. That's going to lead to us not being as compassionate and patient and curious as we need to be. That's why in so many instances, we as therapists can do so much better with your children because we're detached from that. And that's why I even say sometimes you would be better with my child than I would because for that same reason, because I get attached to those things. I want them to change so that I don't have to do all the heavy lifting in this therapy, right? So learning to struggle, learning to see the value in the struggles and the mistakes. And then they're going to make a lot, our children, the children that end up at Evoke make a lot of them. And not just once or twice, over and over and over again, just to be sure. But if we can have the vision, the wisdom, we can have this sense of self that I'm describing, that we're working on, that we're developing, that we're managing, that we're making our project. We're making it our project. If we can do all of that, then we can be present for them. That's why I say when your child is cutting on themselves, it's terrifying to you. When I see it, I look at it as an opportunity to find out what's going on because I have that detachment. I think something we do so constantly in our culture is blaming our children for how we feel. You're only as happy as your least happy child, right? That old wives' tale, that old saying speaks to this culture that we're telling our children they're upsetting us. They're making us sad. We can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't work. Of course they're going to blame us back for being unhappy. And not only do they blame us back because we model it, but they blame us back because we argue and debate with them. If you know, again, I'm speaking of the ideal, if you know you're okay, not perfect, but you know you're okay, then when somebody attacks you, blames you for their unhappiness, you don't hear it as a criticism. You don't feel a need to justify or defend it. You just hear them. You probably even say, I'm so sorry that I let you down. Right? That's what it sounds like when we're operating from an adult place with our children. We don't need to be right or to prove to them that we're right. So we encourage and actually reinforce them blaming us when we argue and justify and tell our story about being right, quoting experts, reasoning, explaining how hard we're trying, all of those things. Not owning our own happiness, not making our life our project is part of the problem, right? It's your responsibility to take care of you, not theirs. There's a culture in our society of trying to get others to change to take care of ourselves instead of us taking care of ourselves, right? We do that with our children. We try to get them to change so that they'll take care of it. You know, I say to families often, I think the most helpful approach can be, don't expect anybody in your family to change. What if nobody in your family changes? And I think if you practice that thought, you know, if you have that meditation, then I think you'll end up, just like with the Viktor Frankel quote, you'll end up focusing on changing yourself. If we are faced with a situation that we cannot change, we're left with only one alternative, one option, and that is to change ourselves, right? That's how we shift, that's how we model, that's how we live this locus of control piece. Some ideas from Man's Search for Meaning. I would say to my clients, my students all the time, that he's the one person that has a right to say it's up to you. Your happiness, your sense of well-being, it's up to you. Right? If somebody else said, if a parent says it or somebody else in our life, we might find the argument inside of ourselves that says, well, you don't have it as bad as I had it. Viktor Frankel, thrown into a concentration camp, watching people be murdered, tortured, starved to death, beaten, watching his whole family disappear, losing his entire family. He's the one person that has the right to say, I had it worse than you. And in the end, it was my responsibility. And he developed logotherapy, which is a lot like existential therapy, which talks essentially about this locus of control, this good faith, bad faith. He had other language for it, but it was basically this idea of taking responsibility for your life, even in circumstances so dire as his in a concentration camp. I used to ask the students this all the time. Who do you think Viktor Frankl wrote the book for? Because a lot of them, being in Willer's therapy, imagined that we gave them the book because it was some kind of parallel with being in a Willer's therapy program. And I was quick to explain, to debunk that idea. This is nothing like perhaps the only similarity is that both of them are outdoors. But my question was, who did Viktor Frankl write this book? And the answer, he wrote it for the average person, living the average life. Living the lie that something, somebody could make them happy. Something in the future could give them meaning. Something outside of them could give them a sense of well-being. And for many of us, who have achieved some success in life in various areas in our life, who have accomplished some goals in life, many of us still run into that sense of emptiness. And sometimes we like to blame it or pin it on our children or our spouse or somebody else or something at work, but really it's inside, it's a broken part inside of us. And that's what logotherapy teaches you. That's what it talks about. That it's an inside problem. It's an inside job. It's not this stuff. It's not what's happened to you. At the end of the day, you are absolutely still responsible for yourself, for the meaning you make out of this life. I used to use the Kurt Cobain example. It's getting a little bit dated now. Kurt Cobain, of course, was the lead singer of Nirvana. And I used to use this story to illustrate the point. Don't know that I was making an accurate analysis of Kurt Cobain, but essentially Kurt Cobain achieved every goal that he wanted to, right? And he wasn't completely one of those people who wanted fame. It wasn't it. But he accomplished his art being heard by other people. He was a part of, a major part of changing music in the 1990s. And in the end of the day, and he had a wife and he had a child, and at the end of the day, he shot himself. And I always had this thought. Again, I don't know that it's true, but to illustrate, I shared this thought with my clients. I said, I have this idea that maybe he got everything that he ever wanted, wife, child, success, respect, and he still wasn't happy. And so he assumed that it was impossible. And I think for our young people, they keep thinking, right, it's that next thing, it's going to happen to them. And a lot of us have learned that in life and learned it more than once in life, that it's not around the corner, it's not around the bend. That's what mindfulness and meditation is about learning to be content in the moment, to be present, right? Some of you have seen that. It wasn't a very good movie, Adam Sandler movie where it was called Click, and he had this magic remote control where he could fast forward through all the unpleasant, boring, monotonous, painful times in his life. And of course, the moral came at the end of the story when he was miserable. It was only in the context of the suffering did he know the joy. Of the struggle did he know the sense of accomplishment, and so on and so forth. And skipping all of the painful, like medicating or using drugs, or being in denial, or not feeling, or running away, whatever it is that we do to block the pain, that's what gives us our character, our growth. And for young people, that's hard, especially when they grew up in a home where pain and anger and sadness weren't okay. When they were told they needed to be happy and that was the goal. And Viktor Frankel made it very clear, happiness is not the goal. You know, I would say to my clients, if happiness were the goal, I would encourage you to take opiates right now until you die. Right? Because if the goal is happiness, then you're going to try to avoid sadness and pain and hurt and, you know, all of those things. And the goal is to feel. I talk about this in the book. I thought when I became a therapist, it was my job to help people to feel happy. And what I realized in many ways, it was my job as a therapist to help people to feel sad. To teach people how to feel the unpleasant, uncomfortable emotions. That's where the healing was. That's where the growth is. So happiness is not the goal. And at times, I think we model and teach that it is to our children. Finding out outside of yourself, of course, is impossible. And it's difficult because in a day and an age when we have a computer, a supercomputer in our pocket, right? When we have access to unlimited amounts of information, entertainment at our fingertips. You know, we're even killing each other. We're killing each other on the streets of America because we can't stop texting or looking at our phone. Because we can't sit with ourselves for a moment in silence. We get into contact with what I love what the comedians Louis C.K. says. We get in contact with that dark, empty part of ourselves, and then we go to a text. Right? We go to something on our phone because we're so uncomfortable. I think it's more imperative now than ever. This wilderness therapy approach, this mindfulness, this focus on feeling everything, that's what it means to be alive, to be a human. And Viktor Frankl talks about giving your suffering meaning. Suffering just for suffering's sake, he didn't see a lot of value or honor in that. But giving your suffering meaning, learning from it, listening to it, even having a child who is struggling with mental health and addiction, instead of spending time wishing that it wasn't happening, wishing you could get back on track, thinking that it shouldn't be happening, that it's not fair, all those kinds of thoughts, if you learn to embrace it, you also, like I talk about in my book, you get to have access to all the wisdom, all the gifts that that part of your journey has to offer, and it's many. Often Viktor Frankel would say, and existential therapists will say, why don't you just give up? Sometimes if a person, they would say, why haven't you killed yourself yet? And why they're asking is they're asking for the person to start to write a narrative about why they're trying. I have lots of clients who threaten to give up. Often they'll threaten to give up after they get the news that they're not coming home after Evoke, or that their parents are drawing a line in their lives that they're not going to allow for that old behavior, whatever it is. And they'll say, well, I should just quit now. And my response was, go for it. I'll see you next week. Tell me how it works. Tell me if you find the solution, right? If you find the other side, the silver lining on the other side of giving up. And almost always, it was an empty threat. Almost always did they withdraw the threat after it had no impact on me. But the fact of the matter, I wasn't scared about that. I wasn't worried about that. If they wanted to give up, give it a try. They've been giving up their whole lives. They've been running away their whole lives. It's just another expression of it. And see where it's landing you. See where it gets you. Another example of valuing the mistakes instead of being afraid of them. A couple of quotes from Frankel. There is much wisdom in the words of Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. A lot of our clients love and highlight this quote. It's probably the most highlighted quote of any from the book. I can see in these words a model which holds true for any psychotherapy. Another thought, the concept, the culture about being happy. Frankel makes this point. To the European, it is a characteristic of the American culture that again and again, one is commanded and ordered to be happy. But happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy. Once the reason is found, however, one becomes happy automatically. As we see, a human being is not one in pursuit of happiness, but rather one in search of a reason to become happy. Last but not least, through actualizing the potential meaning inherent and dormant in a given situation. So I think for a lot of us, it's helping these kids reconnect to a passion, reconnect to themselves, understanding that if happiness is the goal, and I can understand that it's in our culture and we teach it in our family sometimes, that it is inevitable that we will suffer, meaningless suffering. And this is the quote that's from his book that I put on the front of my book. When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And don't lose that on yourself. I mean, that's essentially what these great teachers that we call our children are here teaching us. You can't change them. That's their message. Their message is you can't change me. And that message, that response asks us to change ourselves. That's the whole concept of our program. That's the whole concept in family therapy. That's the whole concept in relationship therapy. It's the key. It's the secret of the universe. It's the difference between Darth Vader and Yoda, as I always say. And George Lucas knew this. It wasn't an accident. If you know the story, Darth Vader, his wife died. And instead of feeling hurt, he turned into this character. And the character's solution to problems in life was to control everything. That's Darth Vader's solution. And Yoda, on the other hand, knew that self-mastery was the key. And that when he experienced pain or grief, he just felt it. He let it pass through him, and he passed through it. The take-home messages from tonight. Do your work. Work on your side of the street. There's a saying that says that to be aware of one shortcoming in yourself is worth more than finding 1,000 shortcomings in somebody else. And there's lots of ways. Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. Right? There's a lot of great lessons. The great spiritual masters who have walked on earth, that we have their recorded words, have taught this lesson over and over and again, over and over again. Learning to follow natural and logical consequences with your children, seeing the value in them instead of getting them to change, just even experiencing the consequences, not removing the difficulties from them, letting them struggle through it. Learning to do the work that it needs, and it's a lot of work, to release your children from taking care of you. And that takes a lot of work. For me, it takes a lifetime of work, a lifetime of practice. Learning to value the struggles. You know, Freud said if you want to teach somebody, if you want to set up a situation for somebody to grow, set them up in a situation where they're going to fail. So it speaks to this idea of learning to value, see the value in struggles, failures, and pain, and increasing your empathic capacity, your capacity as a loved one to suffer through what I call empathic misery. Learning to focus on what you can control as a parent, what you can change. You will find yourself less depressed and less anxious. So for those of you who are struggling, this is the work. A redirection inward. Assume that nobody else in your life is going to change. And then what are you going to do about that? How are you going to survive that? And the lessons are for both parents and children, and it is a parallel track, a parallel lesson, a parallel curriculum. And like I say to my clients all the time, if I were God, right, if I were in control of everything, I would give you your children to teach you what you needed to learn. I would give you your spouse, your ex-spouse, your neighborhood, your community, your boss, your partner, whatever. Those are there to teach you. And when we look at them as our teachers, it opens up a whole world of possibilities. When we look at them as something to get over, something that shouldn't be there, we miss it. All right, folks, if you didn't see it today, if you Google New York Times and Wilderness, you'll see that we were, the play and some pieces from Evoke Therapy Programs was published in the New York Times today. It opens tomorrow night, runs through November 13th. See some of you there next week. We'd like all parents to come to the workshops. And if you want to do deeper work, small groups led by me, come to Defining You. And we're hosting those in Park City. The next one, the slide is kind of off a little bit. The next one is November 10th through 13th, coming up soon. Contact Gail at evoketherapy.com to RSVP or for more questions for the intensives. And for those of you who want to go deeper, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for questions or to register. We would like all families, all parents to go to 6 of the support groups, from Al-Anon to CODA to Families Anonymous. We want you just to try 6 times while you're with us. If you haven't tried yet, please go now. Here are the parent support groups coming up across the country. New York City, I guess that's past, isn't it? That was yesterday, wasn't it? Los Angeles at the start of next month. It's on a Sunday, so you can miss the traffic, have some food, have a parent meeting afterwards. The Bay Area is the following day. Atlanta, December 1st. Toronto, December 12th. I'll be running all of those, the LA, Bay Area, Atlanta, and Toronto parent meetings. Email Stephanie at evoketherapy.com if you don't get the invite for more information or to RSVP. Follow us on social media. Know that we have a podcast and a SoundCloud. So if you have an Android, you can use SoundCloud. If you have an iOS device, you can use your podcast app, and you can just type in Evoke Therapy Programs and subscribe there. We'll be posting 2 to 3 a week, every week, including some old archived ones from our webinar series. Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, the Alumni Foundation page can be found on Facebook. Also, you can go to our blog. Pursuits is the high adventure trip for families and young adults. Therapy Light. My book, The Journey of the Rural Parent, is available on Amazon, paperback now, or audio. Also, you can go to the Alumni Foundation book page and get books. And the part of the proceeds goes through the Amazon Smiles program to people who can't afford, to a charity for people who can't afford treatment. We've already been able to put a couple of people through the program based on donations from families. All right, any live questions before I wrap up for this evening? All right, no questions. I hope these are helpful points of contact. Next Monday, I'll be talking about why wilderness. It'll be an overview of the theory and efficacy of wilderness therapy. Look forward to that. One of my very favorite topics, of course. That'll be this Monday, the 24th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then I'm off to New York to see the play. Can't wait to do it. Have a great evening, great weekend, folks, and I'll see you on Monday. Take care. Bye bye.